Our gospel lesson is from Luke 10, 1 and 2. After this, the Lord appointed 70 others and sent them on ahead of him in pairs to every town and place where he himself intended to go. He said to them, "The harvest is plentiful, but the laborers are few. Therefore ask the Lord of the harvest to send out laborers into his harvest." This is the word of the Lord. Here we are, once again, looking at July 4th tomorrow, in which we celebrate Independence Day. We adopted the Declaration of Independence, Thomas Jefferson being the primary author. 1776 it was when the Continental Congress declared that the 13 American colonies regarded themselves as a new nation, the United States of America, and no longer part of the British Empire. And we as a church will join our community in celebrating Independence Day tomorrow as we march in the parade on Titus Avenue. Part of our freedom involves freedom of religion. And today I want to talk about our freedom of religion, and the reason is due to my recent experience in General Assembly. It's actually given me a new respect for our denomination as a whole. And my experience has given me a new appreciation of Jesus sending 70 disciples out on a mission trip. After this, the Lord appointed 70 others and sent them on ahead of him in pairs to every town and place where he himself intended to go. And he told them, "The harvest is plentiful, but the laborers are few." Indeed, the harvest is plentiful. It includes our whole nation, and it extends to all the world. And the laborers are few. If laborers are to harvest people in society, harvest culture, harvest justice for the oppressed, harvest food for the hungry, and harvest shelter for the homeless, harvest salvation for lost souls, then we must come together and work together to bring God's kingdom to all people. And I experienced laborers coming together this past week in our General Assembly meeting that happens now every 2 years. And who were these laborers? Why, they were people just like me and you. They were elders of churches and pastors of churches. Of course, now in our language, we're calling elders ruling elders and pastors teaching elders. Sometimes I think it should be the other way around, but anyway, each presbytery elects laborers. They call them commissioners to go and participate in the General Assembly. They have the ability to vote and be in committees and have a voice. Well, this year our presbytery elected, among others, Amy Fowler to be a commissioner. And so she was appointed then to be the primary chairperson, along with the co-chairperson, of one of the committees. And this committee was the Committee on the Middle East. Now, the committees met during the first half of the week. In Amy's committee, there were like 80 commissioners. And they vote on certain things, and then in the latter half of the week, over 100 or around 100 reports and overtures were brought to the assembly as a whole to be voted on. There was a lot of work to be done, and if you didn't know before, if you go to one of these, you will find out why we have Robert's Rules of Order. It's important, I tell you. Well, what did they vote on? Well, one of the things they vote on are overtures. And where do overtures come from? They come from me and you. A local church, for instance, a session, a group in the church may have a real point to make about the position of our church on some really important mission issue. For example, let's say that we started really studying child care and really got in touch with it and really were even more engaged in it, and we felt like we had something important to say to the denomination, and we felt like the whole church could benefit from going in a direction that we have had shown to us by God. So we would write up this position paper, so to speak, this overture, and send it to Presbytery, and if they accepted it, then they'd send it on, and so forth, until it got all the way up to the General Assembly. And if the General Assembly let it go through, then it would come to a committee and would be one of the primary issues on which that committee would vote. And if the committee voted it positively, then it would come before the whole floor of General Assembly in the plenary session. And all the commissioners would vote on it. And it's the same with reports. I'll tell you about a couple of reports in a minute. Now, people like me who were not commissioners were called observers, and we got to sit in the peanut gallery and watch. We could go to the committees, and I went to Amy's committees primarily, and then, of course, the plenary sessions, which was the whole group, which was almost 600 commissioners, and newly elected co-moderators who did a fine job. All right, so I want to tell you just a little bit about how it is we're laboring in the harvest. Let's start with Amy's committee. As you well know, the Middle East is nothing if not an important and hot-button issue. The main item of several that her committee had to deal with was a report that had been 2 years in the making. It was on discerning the church's position for maintaining support for a two-nation solution to the Israel-Palestine conflict. And it reaffirmed our values for human rights. An example of that is how children are treated, whether it's Palestinian or Israeli. So the report was written by three, I think, of the most articulate, eloquent people I have ever encountered in one setting. They did a magnificent job articulating what they had done. And they'd been everywhere, they did their research, it was scholarly, it was everything. Well, so we get to the debate. And there is a whole group of commissioners there who did not think that should pass in its present form, and they had their reasons. And so there was this heavy debate. And finally the vote came and the report passed in the committee. So then when it came time for Amy's committee to give its report to the plenary session, everybody, why that then came before the whole General Assembly. And again, there was heavy debate. And there should be heavy debate over an important issue like that. And so it passed. That was on Friday afternoon and evening. Well, after Amy's committee came another committee. This is the second one I want to tell you about. In another committee, an overture, I don't know where that overture originated, but it came anyway into this committee, and it was an overture for the denomination to express a symbolic resistance to something in the service of dealing with climate change. The overture was to have us divest our funds from all fossil fuel companies. Now, the primary body that manages most of our funds, or at least the vast majority, is the Board of Pensions. And they manage around $8 billion. That's a lot of money. Well, they, in response to that overture, another committee that contains some Board of Pensions members wrote a report that had again been 2 years in the making. Well, overall, the Board of Pensions did not favor divestment. And when you get into that large amount of money with that massive interconnected situation involving fossil fuel, it's an incredibly complex issue, and then there are legal concerns, etc. And by the way, the Board of Pensions has these two primary things, and one of them is managing the money for pensions of the clergy of our denomination so that we won't be out on the street starving when we retire. And that's very important. And the other major deal is providing good medical insurance for clergy, and they're trying to expand it out to other church workers. And so they have a real responsibility to serve the church in this way. So it had some heavy debate in their committee, and the committee voted in favor of the overture to divest. And so that then came to the floor of the General Assembly as a whole. And you talk about heavy debate now. It was like being at the Super Bowl and it's tied in the fourth quarter. It was riveting. So, it turns out, well, you could tell in the beginning that probably the group as a whole was going to pass the overture. Because, climate change is a really important issue for virtually the entire world. And, not everybody thinks about it in the same way, but however you think about it, it's an important issue. We're to be good stewards of God's earth. So out comes the overture and the debate begins. And then it comes out that the report had not been dealt with in the committee. Somebody made a boo-boo. And people were pretty steamed about that. Now, Amy is a clergy representative on the Board of Pensions. And she's actually going to be chairing a committee that deals with church relations, because they've got to explain a lot of stuff about evolving medical insurance to the churches. And so I got to hang around with all these Board of Pensions people. Financial people, medical doctors, lawyers, and a little sprinkling of clergy. And on the whole, their report said, no, we should not divest, and they had an alternative proposal. Because, it would take years literally and never would happen completely anyway. So that comes out. So then they had to be heard. And then this other big issue comes out. And this is something I didn't learn until just, a couple of years ago. Because I never dealt with these kinds of matters very much. When you've got billions of dollars and you invest a lot of money in companies, you're an investor and you get to sit at the table and you get to wield your influence. Well, that came out that, our church has been engaging as laborers in the harvest in that way for many years. And we actually build coalitions with other denominations who are investing in order to actually have a meaningful voice at the table. And we do so in order to try to influence companies to go in healthy directions and in directions that have good, solid human rights principles, etc. And we try to let God's kingdom be in the area of business. So that came out, and some people said, well, the divestment overture does say that we'll keep just a teeny bit of stock so that we can stay at the table. But then this old crusty old guy who'd been doing this for like 30 years came out and said, look, you have a little teeny bit, you don't have any influence. They don't have to pay any attention to you. So you could just feel the atmosphere shifting. And it's not for nothing that Jesus said to these 70, I'm sending you out as sheep to the wolves. I can imagine being a pastor sitting in some huge investment room with the CEOs and heavy-duty investors trying to have influence. I would really feel like a sheep in the midst of wolves. Well, the General Assembly voted to replace the overture with that report as a substitute motion. That's what you do. I learned that. And then they passed the substitute motion. So we're not engaging in wholesale divestment of fossil fuel companies. But an interesting feature of that report is that now the Board of Pensions itself is commissioned to kind of go on a case-by-case method and maybe even recommend divestment from some particular fossil fuel company. And they've already been making plans for figuring out what seminars they have to go to and this and that. And I got to know the person who is the head of the Board of Pensions. His name is Frank. And I truly believe that he has a pastoral heart and a mission vision. Now some folks, they're just going to be bean counters and that's about it. Although all the folks, they give up their time and talent to the church. But I think he has such a vision that he will be very genuine in engaging in that process over the next several years. So that was a really interesting one. And let me just tell you one more. So we've got laboring in the harvest of international relations in the Middle East and conflict and human rights. We've got laboring in the harvest of big business. And now we've got laboring in the harvest of racism. A couple years ago, I believe it was, there was an effort to bring a new confession into our book of confessions. And when we have a new confession, we don't just let go of all the old ones, we add it to the collection. because each confession speaks to a particular historical era. And it would really be an interesting thing for us to study together, the Book of Confessions. So this latest one is called the Belhar Confession. And it came from South Africa, and I believe it was written in a time of apartheid, wasn't it? It was standing in Christian values against apartheid. And it's been making the rounds in presbyteries, and it did come to our presbytery, and we voted to pass it. And so now it has made its way to General Assembly, and it comes before the Assembly, and it is passed. And this is the first document of this kind, confession, that comes from that region of the world, and it does help us to articulate a Christian understanding of the human family in the face of racism. And as we all know, racism has been a lifted up issue in the last couple of years in our country. So these are some of the areas of harvest that our denomination as a whole is addressing by sending out laborers. And so I give thanks for that. And it helps me to really reaffirm that we are a connectional church. We are not an independent, isolated little group of people. We are part of the body of Christ that is all over this nation and into other nations in the world. And it really helps to put things in perspective when you can get yourself in a broader body of Christians. It helps, it not only just feels good, it really broadens your perspective out. Even going to presbytery does some of that for us. Well, after GA, some of the General Assembly folks sent out an email talking about our recent GA. And I just want to end by sharing with you a quote from that email, how it ended. We are, brothers and sisters, in a new season. It's exciting, but also a little scary. Yet in the midst of it all, take comfort that God is still guiding and controlling all. And we need not fear. God is calling us to hope, and to God be the glory. Amen.